Just tell me a little bit about the type of films that you show in your class.
I use a variety of films that deal with Cold War themes that are both primary and secondary sources.
And you want to just define those terms maybe? What do you mean exactly?
So films that come out of the time period that we're studying, so for instance if we're looking at the 1960s, a film that's made in the 1960s is a primary source, and films that are made about the 1960s in the 1990s are secondary sources, so sources that look back. And so I use both types of films in the course so that students can start to kind of interrogate, you know, how are these useful for our understanding of a particular theme. I'm having them, we really break it into 3 themes overall in the course. So we look at Cold War America generally, and some of the films, I have a kind of a little image here that has captured some of the films. We look at films like 13 Days, which of course deals with the Cuban Missile Crisis. We watch Good Night and Good Luck, which is about the Red Scare in America. And so films that really kind of set the context for what's happening in the Cold War period. And then I deal with 2 other themes, gender in the Cold War and race in the Cold War. And so in terms of gender, we look at films like Pleasantville, which is a film looking back on, was there really a return to normalcy in the 1950s? Did women really love being at home and you know, making dinner for their husbands while the husbands were out at work in their gray flannel suits? We look at films like Mona Lisa's Smile, which again is a secondary film that looks back on women's roles in their education in this time period. I have often shown the film Tootsie from the 1980s to sort of say, well, what happens, you know, when men kind of dress up as women and have to take on different kinds of roles and their understanding of gender roles generally. And we also deal with race in the course, and so I want them to think about the Civil Rights Movement because I think that's really significant, particularly in the Cold War. And we watch films like Guess Who's Coming to Dinner, which really is from the 1960s, and so they're able to see, it's very interesting to see the students watch that film because they're appalled at the fact that these kinds of relationships are, you know, sort of unfolding in this time period. You know, you got a liberal white family whose daughter decides to date a black man, and what does this mean, and how the, you know, Sidney Poitier's parents are as upset by this as you know, the white woman's family are. And so students really get a lot out of, I think, seeing those films. But then we also move into more contemporary periods and we look back. So Mississippi Burning deals with, you know, a terrible murder that happens in Mississippi, although fictionalized. So, and so they get to ask questions about, well, what characters has the filmmaker added? What's different from, you know, the film, from the real story, that kind of thing. And so I get them really asking questions about the films, but also introducing them to some of these topics that they really haven't thought about before. Certainly Vietnam is a big issue and students love war, and so we do talk about films in that genre as well. And so it's really interesting to see students sort of asking questions about, well, you know, what was happening during the Vietnam War, you know, Born on the 4th of July, why would veterans kind of stand up against this particular war and things like that. And so it allows them to really, I think, piece together an overall view of the Cold War that might be more difficult to teach in a kind of a chronological way when we're limited by 12 weeks.
Do you ever show anything that is difficult to process, upsetting? How do you handle that in a classroom setting with film? Because films are emotional. They evoke a response in the students.
Yeah, I do. I mean, my area of expertise is abortion history, and so I do show a film called If These Walls Could Talk, which is a really great film that shows 3 historical vignettes around abortion and how abortion rights changed from the 50s through to the 90s. And so I always give students the warning that, you know, this is very graphic material, and I give them the opportunity to not participate if they need to do that, and I point them to other readings and things that they can tap into instead. When we talk about Vietnam, I mean, I often show the film Platoon, and students are very disturbed by it. But at the same time, I think part of our job at universities is to make students a little bit uncomfortable and to get them thinking beyond their own experience. So I think it's really important to show them those kinds of films and to open them up to ideas about things that they haven't really considered before. We are privileged at universities. I mean, at least in Canada, we have students who are able to be here pursuing their post-secondary education, and so often those students haven't thought about some of these tough issues, and so I think it's really important to get them to think about it.
To stretch.
Yeah, to stretch them, exactly.